there is some news around newsletters in SharePoint to get back on the Microsoft Cloud track. So this is a new SharePoint news for email feature. So you can now have your SharePoint news come into email in Omnivore, Scott, with this.
Yes.
And I initially saw this and I have mixed feelings, but I also can see where it could be beneficial. Is what this feature essentially does is it allows you to convert your SharePoint news posts into distributions that can be emailed. Now, we're both longtime SharePoint people, and my initial thought was, well, I thought we created SharePoint and we created news in SharePoint so that we don't have to get all of these emails and we can just go to SharePoint and view the news there versus continuing to clutter our mailbox and post this in two places. But I don't know that that's ever actually come to fruition the way Microsoft envisioned or sold it either. And your experience with some of the stuff you do, you were actually really excited about this particular feature.
Yes. So this feels like a feature that was built for people at Microsoft, and I think that's okay. So I read some kind of negative sentiment about this. So, the always awesome Tony Redmond, saw this one pop up, was on it, looked at it, and he's like, I don't get it. Like, why would you want to take the content that's in a SharePoint site and then just push it out through email? Because it's already in SharePoint. It's one of those things that when you sit down and think about it, it's the way he framed it, and I can see how he landed here, is it's a feature that's seeking a problem, or really it's a hammer that's just out there looking for a nail, right? And anything's going to be a nail, to give it another analogy. And I get how he landed there. And the reason he landed there is because he said it's easy to copy and paste interesting news snippets into a regular email if you want to. And I say yes to that, but also very much no to that. So let me give you a use case.
Okay.
I work at Microsoft, right? And one of the things that happens at Microsoft is email makes the world go round. There are just sometimes that you can't compel people to go and look at a SharePoint site. Like, I have the RSS feed, so I might see the new news article pop up in the SharePoint site. Not everybody's going to do that, right? But everybody has Outlook on their mobile devices and everything else. So there's certain things that you just want to communicate to your organizations that frankly have to happen through email. But email is a great delivery mechanism to do the initial communication. It's not a great communication mechanism for keeping the information for later. So one of the things that I do is I work on a virtual team that puts together our kind of internal newsletter and for our whole organization. And that newsletter is everything for like, oh, here's what's upcoming in like planning and what you should be thinking about from like the PMO. Here's an interesting customer story. Like, we're always working on like gnarly customer problems, and we want to disseminate those to the team, both our PMs and our engineers. Like, hey, let's show you how our customers are actually using our products. We do engineering stories. We do team updates, all the feature updates, all those kinds of things, right? And we need to get those out. But there's units of information that I want to retain for a long time. Like, all those customer stories are valuable case studies to go back and look at later. So I want all those like in a SharePoint site where I can go back and refer to them and search for them and say like, oh, what did we do with Contoso Toys last year? That was like, the big whiz bang thing. So the way that I started out is when I started with this whole newsletter thing, like I was kind of in charge of figuring out like, okay, where's it going to land? What's it going to do? So I was like, I'm a SharePoint person. I'll just put it all in SharePoint. There's news posts. There's all these things. I can have lists and I can tag and classify and blah, blah, blah. So I made the world's most awesome SharePoint site. And I came back and I said, okay, folks, so let's do our first newsletter in SharePoint. We wrote everything up on the webpage and we got it ready to go. And then it came to, oh, how are we going to send the newsletter? Well, if you use the native functionality that was there before this new stuff that was announced, literally it was just a block of text, right? Like a paragraph and a picture that came through in the email. That doesn't convey the whole message for people who aren't going to go visit the SharePoint site. So that doesn't work. What's the other alternative? Well, like Tony said, hey, maybe we just like copy and paste out into a regular email. The problem is you're not copying and pasting into a regular email. Like your newsletter has a specific format. Often it has a header picture at the top. It might have a standard footer, like a button that's always there that says, hey, click here to contact the team and let us know more about what's going on. Like all those kinds of things. So that implies that there's some level of kind of formatting and rigor there. So of course, not only do I have a SharePoint site to deal with, now I have an email template. So now I'm not just copying and pasting into an email, I'm copying and pasting from SharePoint into an email template, which then I have to reformat, put all together, redo my tables, redo my headings. I have to redo all the links, right? Because we have like an index at the top that says, hey, here's the contents. And so that takes like not a ton of time, but it's at least like 30 minutes every time to fix the format and get it all done. So for me, like this is like, I don't care that this feels like it was built for somebody like me. Like this is absolutely what I want, is just a button where I can click a button and it puts together an email in HTML that is formatted exactly like, well, not exactly like, but as close as it can be to the SharePoint page itself. It can only send to internal people. Perfect. Click the button, go, and I'm done. Now I get my SharePoint page done, locked, ready to go. It's all set. I get the email to go out, and I get all the information retained in SharePoint, and everything is everything that's beautiful out there about it. So I don't know. Like personally, I am excited about this one. I think if you run internal newsletters, particularly branded newsletters, not like, oh, I just slapdash this and it goes into like a weekly report to, my boss kind of thing. But like, I need it to look a little bit better. I need it to be consistent in how it looks, how it comes through, all these things. Like this does solve a problem for certain types of organizations.
Right. I can see that. And I can see like the use case that you gave when we were talking about this and just now of being able to send it as an email for those people that still prefer emails or want to read it in emails, but then have it maintained for however long in SharePoint, where it is searchable, it's findable, it could be pulled into topics, maybe newer people. Let's say someone joins Microsoft and someone makes a reference to, oh, did you see this in the latest newsletter? Maybe a new employee didn't get the latest newsletter because they weren't there yet. They could go back and view the history of newsletters in SharePoint. Well, again, still having that ability to email it out. I can see some value there. As you were talking, I'm sitting here thinking through like certain organizations may have a lot of the frontline workers, the workers that maybe don't visit SharePoint. They're only on a mobile device. They're always out on the road. They're not sitting here like, let me go browse SharePoint news articles on my phone. Being able to reach them with an email of, let's put this in SharePoint. The people that are sitting at their desk that are in SharePoint every day can see it. The people that really only live in email can get that same nicely formatted news article, everything right in their email. So I agree. I think the initial announcement, I had some of that skepticism and stuff that maybe Tony Redmond had. But as we've talked through this, I would say this feature has grown on me as I'm seeing more of these use cases of, okay, this kind of makes sense. It eases the work for people that write these newsletters. I think it's a valid, nice feature for certain situations. It's not going to be for everybody, but there are absolutely use cases for this one.
Yeah, I think if you want to see, and it's another thing that in the back of my head makes me think like this is not a feature that's potentially like seeking out a problem to solve. Go look at the tech community post for this. I'll have a link in the notes, but and just go read through the comments. Like there's a ton of comments that aren't like, oh, this is a great thing, nice to see. It's actually comments, and these are the types of comments that I'd love to see from customers when we release things, is they're comments that push back and suggest new features like, oh, hey, did you think about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? And there's already 2 pages. I think there's 25 comments a page, something like that. But it's already spilling over to like page 2 with just all this actionable feedback for like, hey, here's ways that this could potentially be better. Did you think about this? Is this coming next? Like all that kind of stuff, which generally gives me the feeling that you're on the right track, right? Like people read it, people saw it, they looked at it, they maybe played with it, and they said, ooh, but now I need it to do this, and it's perfect for me. Like that's a great first step for an MVP to get it out the door. So I get it. Like email is boring. We all think that knowledge workers and information workers should be able to adapt to like the way we think as geeks for how we put all this together. The reality is like that's just not the way the world works, right? So you've got to get on a different kind of train to get all that stuff going and get it to where it needs to be. So the other thing that I would recommend is if you go to that tech community post, there's a video in there. So go watch the video. It will answer 95% of your questions where you might be thinking like, does it do this? Does it do this? Oh, I'm just going to go fire off a comment, or like just watch the video. I think it explains some of the weird nuance that's there with this feature as it exists today, and just how to get going with it. So,
yep. And this is
I'm generally a fan. Like I said, like this fills an actual like gap and a pain point in my life, and I love features like that like they just make an end user's life easier. And for me as an end user, like super selfishly, this is one of those things that makes my life a lot easier.
Yeah, and this should be there now or shortly for everybody. Like this kind of got announced. When did this article come out? We're a little slow. It was published August 29. But it was rolling out to targeted release customers starting in August. So probably the day this was published, should be there for everyone by the end of September 2023. So the end of this month. And there's a couple things in the FAQ. The other one that's kind of nice about this, Scott, having those tied together, is the view counter. If your company cares about analytics, how many people are viewing it, the view counter on your SharePoint news article is going to include both the SharePoint views as well as if people are viewing the article through the email client. So you do still get a cumulative view count as well of how many people are actually reading my newsletter.
Yeah. They're pulling in, I think, some analytics from Graph and other things in there, which is good.
Yep. So it is. I would agree. I have been flipped over to this is from why to this is kind of a nice, nifty little feature.